All right, so I'm going to be covering the Beatrice 6. So, in 1985, a woman named Helen Wilson was brutally murdered in her apartment in Beatrice, Nebraska. The investigators faced intense pressure to solve the case quickly, and early forensic evidence led them away from the real perpetrator. As the investigation went on, police focused on six individuals, being Thomas Winslow, James Dean, Deborah Sheldon, Kathy Gonzalez, Ada Joanne Taylor, and Joseph White, which unfortunately all falsely confessed. Some were told that they had repressed memories of the crime, and others were convinced they must have been involved despite having no clear recollection. Their statements conflicted with each other and with physical evidence as well, but investigators treated the confessions as undeniable proof. In the years that followed, the six were convicted and served time for their murder they didn't commit. It wasn't until 2007 that the DNA testing finally told the truth and um, hinted at the real perpetrator being Bruce Allen Smith. So, with the investigation, the Beatrice Six, um, they had forensic evidence supposedly all directed at them, suggesting that they were all part of the crime, which included blood and semen, which was all done and produced by Joyce Gilchrist, a forensic analyst. At the time, serology testing was very limited because it was a new type of study, and no clear suspect could be identified at the time. Without eyewitnesses or strong physical evidence, the case went cold for several years. Later, new detectives reopened the case and began focusing on several locals. A police psychologist, Wayne Price, used intense interrogation tactics very similar to the Reed technique that led the suspects to doubt their own memory. Through suggestion and pressure, several began to believe they had recovered memories of the crime. These psychological manipulations, combined with fear of harsher punishment, like um, Price actually um, said that they would have life sentences and would die in prison if they don't work with him, basically. All of the Beatrice Six were accused. The investigation relied heavily on these supposed memories and inconsistent statements while ignoring the lack of reliable forensic proof. During prosecution, all but one, Joseph White, accepted plea deals to avoid the death penalty, each confessing to some role in the crime, while maintained his innocence and went to trial, but even he was convicted, largely on the strength of the other coerced confessions. So he kind of just got tied into it with the rest of them. For years, they lived under the weight of guilt that wasn't theirs. Then, between around 2007 and 2009, there was a lot of updates to DNA testing and became a lot more concrete. It was finally approved for this past case, and the results were very clear. None of the Beatrice Six were ever a part of the crime or situation at all, and it was actually Bruce Allen Smith as the sole perpetrator. But unfortunately, he had died years earlier to the release of the six. Between 2000 and 2009, or sorry, 2008 and 2009, all the six were exonerated. And together they were awarded $28 million in damages, which was one of the largest settlements for wrongful conviction in the US history. So for the case analysis, I would say the biggest flaw in the entire case was the coercive interrogation tactics. So the Reed technique was heavily used in all of the interrogations of the six, which would pressure and intimidate the suspects until several of them began to believe that they actually had repressed memories of the crime. These false confessions became the backbone of the prosecution, even though they didn't match the physical evidence. Second, faulty forensic science made things even worse. The forensic examiner, Joyce Gilchrist, overstated weak or unreliable findings. No proper DNA was done at the time, yet the supposed matches were treated as solid proof. Third, another flaw was the vulnerability of the suspects. So that all of the Beatrice Six had some kind of low IQ or mental health challenge, making them far more suggestible and easy to manipulate. They trusted the investigators and were easily led into confessing to something that they did not do. Then came confirmation bias. Once police believed that they had the right people, which I think is just the first people that they kind of saw as suspects, so they just went with it. They ignored all contradictions otherwise. Any evidence that didn't fit the theory was explained away. When doubts surfaced, investigators rationalized them instead of reconsidering the case and looking into it further. Finally, there's cognitive dissonance. Even as evidence failed to line up, officers didn't admit they might be wrong, so they clung to their initial conclusions, like I was saying, rather than face the discomfort of being mistaken. So I would say some of the most important reforms, which is kind of in hindsight almost. Um, I'd say the first one would be, well, I'm kind of going back on what I'm saying, but forensic science, they did have education. Joyce Gilchrist did have a bachelor's, but I don't think it was enough. I think having a master's or a doctorate level certification would have played a huge role in basically not convicting these six people. So yeah, trained professionals with a solid scientific foundation are required to make the best possible outcome and choose the best possible suspects for conviction, with all evidence being under consideration. Second, law enforcement should replace coercive interrogation methods like Reed with the peace model that's used in other countries, which focuses on open communication and honesty rather than manipulation and coercing a confession. Third, safeguards such as recording interrogations and ensuring access to legal counsel should be standard. Well, it should have been standard for them, especially because they were very vulnerable and had some disabilities or incapabilities with intellect and things like that. Finally, we must actively address bias through training that teaches investigators to question their own assumptions and remain open to new evidence. So, in conclusion, the Beatrice 6 case reveals how power, pressure, and poor science can lead to tragedy, but it also shows how learning from these failures can strengthen justice. By prioritizing fairness, transparency, and education, we can make sure innocent people don't end up with the same fate as the Beatrice Six, which this whole case was presented by the Innocence Project. That is their goal.